All right, so working with stencil layers and object IDs for the final composite, bringing everything back from Unreal to After Effects for our composite. This was an image that we've been working with or looking at when we talked about tracking. This was something that I just quickly threw together. She's not keyed out very well. But the idea is that we have camera movement here. And in Unreal, we have that camera movement as well. Except here we kind of have to imagine it because she's not currently placed in the world, right? So to get this scene, I had to render out separate pieces. I had to render out the foreground, and this is on transparency. Foreground, same camera movement. Had to render out background, same camera movement. Notice it has the hole where the foreground element is. Doesn't really need the hole. It's kind of a harkens back to the old way where they actually literally had to have the hole in it to rephotograph things. But even if you just had the original, I'm not sure if I have that actually. Yeah, even if you just had the original of everything, I also have the foreground that I can just place on top of it too. And then I have her green screen layer. If I start to stack these together, she's keyed out. The movie magic starts to happen. She's not color graded properly. The scene's not lit how she's lit. She has no shadow. But from a layer standpoint, she's starting to be composited together. Obviously, we need a lot more work to make it look better. And also, I noticed that the camera track that was originally done, she kind of drifts here at the end. So you can see her foot drift. Gets closer to this rock right here. Look. It's like I show you and everybody's like, oh yeah, it looks pretty cool. And then I'm like, let me tell you how it sucks. See how she's drifting a little bit there? Solutions to fix something like that? Do a better camera track in the beginning. What can we do at this point? Well, we could try to fudge it by, I don't know, maybe moving the green screen layer as the camera moves. So if I put like a key here, and then I notice that she's drifting towards that rock, and the camera kind of slows down right there. This is a trial and error thing. And I move her back. Yeah, it's better. It's not perfect, but it's better. Easy way to fix it is just cover her feet up with another rock, right? Another cool thing we can do in post-production is, I actually don't know if I'll be able to do this good. These are just layers now. So if I put this layer behind this one, oops, why's that one moving all over the place? Oh, there's a key there for some reason. Delete that. I was just trying to move the rock. The perspective is not going to be right because it wasn't filmed in that position, but I was trying to quickly show you, cover her feet up, and it's not a problem anymore, right? Feet standing on green screen, getting that to look good in a world, very, very difficult. Even without camera movement, it's difficult to make look good. And then, we have the green screen, so we could put whatever sort of background we want behind her. And this allows me to control individual elements where I can say, this actually does have a little motion blur on it that was rendered out. But what if I wanted I'm just freestyling here. What if I wanted to put some more blur on? Maybe I'll try some directional blur on the foreground element. And the camera's moving horizontally. I don't know, maybe stretch it out more. Now I would probably want to increase the blur when the camera's moving faster and the camera slows down and reduce the blur by keyframing the blur amount. But you can start to see how we can control these things outside of Unreal. I could also do things like levels in post-production. Get rid of that blur there. So, I wanted to tweak things, or if I wanted to key out that moth and change the color to purple or something like that, I could do all of those things in post-production rather than having to kick it back to Unreal. So how did I get all this stuff? Let's start from the beginning. So I have a scene in Unreal here that you've already seen the scene. And I just built this because I wanted her to stand in the middle of the rocks. I told you already that we need to create layers in Unreal. Layers go in the Layers tab in Unreal. If you don't have the Layers tab, you can always get it from Window, Layers, and turn it on. Layers are useful even if you don't want to deal with this rendering stuff. Layers are good from an organizational standpoint too. Say you wanted to just put all the trees in a layer and you just turn them off so you can work on other things. I don't know, maybe your computer's really choking and when you have all the trees on, it makes things really slow. So instead of going in the outliner and selecting all of them and changing the visibility to hidden, you could just put them all in a layer and just turn the layer off. Sort of like a group in Photoshop. It turns off all the layers, right? Or it turns off all the layers in the group. Think of layers like groups, sort of. So layers also interesting from an organizational standpoint. All right, so let's create some layers. So select the asset that you want to put in the layer. My mouse cursor disappeared. Weird, it's on the TV, but it's not on my laptop screen. So I have to kind of guess where it is. This happens when I record on OBS simultaneously. It's really weird that it's right there. It's not here. So I just click on things till I find what I need. All right, I'm gonna look up there. All right, so I selected the foreground rock here. Let's find it. The foreground rock. So this is a very simple example. And I'm gonna create a layer for this. I'm gonna right click in the layers menu. And here you can create empty layers that then you can drag assets into, or you can use what you have selected to create a new layer as well. I already have the rock selected, so I'm going to say add selected actors to new layer. It's going to ask me, what do you want to call it? And I will call it foreground. So now when I click this little eyeball on foreground, the stuff that's in it disappears. If I wanted to, I could add these background assets, the other rocks, the ones in the background. I guess there's that one too, the three of them. I could add them to that layer too. I know it's not the foreground, but bear with me right now. If I right click on it, here it says, add selected actors to new layer. No, I don't want to do that right now. Add selected actors to selected layer. So add the selected actors to an existing layer. I want to do that. So now when I click the eyeball on foreground, they all disappear. Makes sense, right? It's like putting things in a group. So I didn't really want to do that though. I wanted to put those ones in another layer called background. This is where I'm showing you how to use layers a little bit. So if I click on the foreground one, down in the bottom here, it shows you, it says 4, concrete block 4. That means that there's 4 actors inside of this layer right here. How do I see what those assets are? Well, down in the bottom left, it says see contents. So you click on the layer you want, and then you click see contents. And it gives you a little view here. It says the contents of foreground. And there's a little arrow in the top left that you can use to go back to the original menu. Here it shows me all the assets that are in foreground. And I could select the ones that I want to get rid of, which is the ones in the background. So I'm just going to remove them. Remove, remove, remove. So now I just have the front one in the foreground, like I originally wanted. It's pretty simple. It's just dragging things in, clicking them out. I'm going to select the background 3 again, right click, add selected actors to new layer, call this background. So now I have them separated out as separate pieces. That's it. That's all you need to do to set this up. Now that we have told Unreal which assets are in which layer, now we can go to render. And when we render, we can choose in a drop-down box, I want to render this as a separate layer, background. I want to render that as a separate layer, foreground. So you need to identify them first by putting assets in them and naming the layers. Then it will pop up as an option when you render it out. Does that make sense? Pretty straightforward. So let's go to render then. So to get this to work, I mentioned that there was a couple things that you needed to do. Let's do that first before we go to render. Movie render pass. So this is for the crypto mat and the object IDs, not the stencil layers, which we're doing right now. But since we're here, I'm just going to show you both. Turning this on, otherwise you won't have the option for object IDs. The other thing you need to do, that's in the plugins. The other thing you need to do is in project settings. And I usually just type in alpha in the search and then in enable alpha channel support and post-processing. This is usually set to disabled by default. You need to set allow tone mapper. And then restart. Word of warning, when you change a rendering setting like the alpha channel support here, Unreal Engine has to go back and rebuild all the shaders, so it can take a decent amount of time for the editor to open back up. Don't panic, just wait longer. It will hang at 45% for what seems like forever. And sometimes you'll get the update like 7,000 shaders left, 6,000, 5,000, 4,000. And you'll be like, oh, cool, this is moving pretty fast. And then it will just stay at 4,000 for a long time. Don't panic. As long as you don't blue screen of death, just wait longer. I think so. I am. Look at that. I mean, it says I am. We'll see at the end. If not, I have a video from every single year that I've done this talk that you can watch. You can watch them all back to back and see and listen to all the same stupid jokes, the same coughing fits, all this good stuff. The same students saying, "Are you recording, sir?" Me in a panic, realizing I didn't. So we need to turn that stuff on. If you render out a stencil layer, and I'll say this again, this is a mistake half of you will make. If you render out a stencil layer and it's all black in the background where it should be transparent, it's because you didn't do this. Those of you that maybe know a little bit more about compositing, I'm sure you could get a decent mat and use a Luma mat to key out the backgrounds, but that's too advanced. All right, so turn those things on. Now we just need to render. So let's be fancy first and try to render out a multi-channel EXR. So rendering, same as we've done before. I haven't done anything different yet. Click on settings. We're in the pros now, folks. So EXRs, they're much higher quality. And actually, you know what? Funny thing is they will actually play faster on your computer than a PNG sequence will, or a JPEG sequence. Why is that? Because they're not compressed. EXRs are not compressed. They're also really, really big compared to a JPEG or a PNG. But they're very performant, and like I said, they're made for VFX, so it makes sense that they play good. Also about EXRs, the very first assignment in this class was to bring video footage into Unreal Engine. I think everybody did that as a PNG file because I think we removed the background, right? From now on, if you ever have to do that again, you're going to bring it in as an EXR file. Okay. You know all that buffering that you would go hit play in Unreal and the green bar is moving along in sequencer depending on how much RAM you have, it would stutter. You'll get much better performance with EXR files too, even though they are 4 times the size. Because they're made for that stuff. All right, so EXR files, yeah, you just need to select it from the settings, just like we select whatever file type that we want. I already have EXR selected, so it's not here in this list, but you would select it from here, EXR, and it will pop up. You can also do all the normal things that you would do if you wanted to have anti-aliasing or temporal sampling, some of the more advanced rendering stuff that we haven't talked about yet. You can still do all that. Output, pick your resolution, pick your output directory, same as before. I'm gonna just call this, I'll just call this 1. Or no, you know what? I'll call this multi-layer, because that's what we're doing. Multi-layer. What else do we want? Maybe I'll render out just like 75 frames so we don't need to do the whole thing. But you know what? Let's just do the whole thing. Next thing, the most important thing, is you need to click on Deferred Rendering and pick your layers. So I had already had this. This is an older project, so I already had this stuff clicked on. But when you open this, it will look like this. See down bottom here, it says Stencil Clip Layers. That's where we pick our actor layers. And right now it says 0 elements in the array. If I click on the plus button here and plus again, I get 2 drop-down menus that then list those things that I defined as layers a couple minutes ago, foreground and background. And look, it even says how many actors are in each one. I want to render out both of them, so I'm going to put both of them on here. Maybe you only have 1 here. Maybe you have 20 here. It's fine. Depends on how many you want to do. Other things that you need to click on. If you want to render out the alpha channel, which you probably should, you should check accumulator includes alpha. Otherwise, it will come on black. You may want it on black. Depends on how you're compositing. Add default layer. Default layer is like a really easy, say when you make a scene, you probably have hundreds or maybe even thousands of actors in your scene. I don't know, you have trees all in the distance, right? It's a lot of stuff. You really want to go through the outliner or the world and like shift select every single one of them to just put them on the background layer. It's a little tedious, right? So what the default layer is if you check that, anything that is not assigned to a layer will be rendered out in a layer called default. Okay? So you could just not put things in the background, not make a background layer, and just click default layer, and the default layer will be your background. So it would be everything that you didn't select that's in the background. Sometimes I like to check that just to have it too. I'll check it for now just so you can see it rendered out. And I think that's it. Set your resolution, click accept, click render. And you should see it start to parse out the separate pieces right here in the render preview. Oh, look at that. Oh, it's rendering the green screen too. I'm not going to use that footage, but it could be useful to have for alignment purposes in post-production. Also, the more layers, the more stencil layers that you're rendering out, it exponentially increases the render time. Because in my case, I have the default layer, the background layer, the foreground layer. It's basically rendering this video 3 times, right? So that only took like 30 seconds. But you imagine if you have a very complex scene, doing these stencil layers could really increase your render time, which may or may not be important depending on your deadline and your sanity. So let's check out what we have. If I go, I think I put this in a folder called multi-layer. Oh, you know what? I messed up. Like, dude, that was 200 and some frames, but why do you have 856 of them? You know why? Because I forgot to check the multi-layer button. A lot of things to check. So in EXR, if you do want to do this as multi-layer, which I did caveat with there being a bug with the color, still neat to see for demo purposes. You need to click on EXR and change this to multi-layer. Toggle box. So now instead of 856, how many frames is there? 235. What, 235 times 3? Is that, is there actually 235 or is there more? No, there's more, there's less than that. How many frames are there? I'm just trying to see how many frames are actually in the sequence. 213. Or 4 times 213, is that 836 or 856 or whatever the number was? Whatever, the point is it rendered out a lot more files than I wanted it to. So now when I render this, it's going to render out just the 214 files. If I look at the folder, you can see them being produced. When it gets to 214, it should stop. Almost there. There we go, 214. Because all those layers have been baked into the one EXR file. If I open this up in Photoshop, because I have the EXR IO plugin installed. If you don't have this installed, you won't be able to do this in Photoshop. Look at that. Background layer, foreground layer, because that's what I called them in Unreal. Default layer. Kind of neat, right? And if I open that up in After Effects, let's dump all this stuff into a folder. Multi-layer, EXR, import, oops. Import to create composition. So I'm just going to have this create compositions on import here to show you something. Click OK. And if I look at this, it's kind of cute. It creates like a contact sheet composition for you, so you can see all of the separate elements next to each other, which is kind of cool to see. Also, it shows it assembled. But here you can see the coloring bug. See, this is what it's supposed to look like, but it actually the individual pieces look like this. pretty sure I could solve it, but something's changed with the Unreal version that we're using that I just have to double check something. So this is my suggestion of why not to use multi-layer EXRs, even though they're pretty cool because it keeps everything in one file. If you just brought in the XR file without creating a composition, I bring it into After Effects and look, it's like it's one layer. This is where that plugin, or not plugin, this is where the effect, the extractor comes in. Extract with the capital E, X, and R. It's very intense. So I drag the extractor effect on top of here. And I click on layers in the effect. Here I can choose which layer that I want to be active. So if I picked foreground, everything disappears on that single layer down here. And then I could duplicate this, and on this layer I could change it from. It's another bug. It's weird that it doesn't, when you select it and pick something, it doesn't say what it is. It's just gray. Pick background. So that one has the background, that one has the foreground. I guess it does say it in the individual channels right there, final image foreground. So they're also separate pieces now too. I guess you could do something like, even with that color bug, like this looks good. So I could do something like take the layer that looks good, in this case the default layer. This is more advanced compositing. This is kind of a show and tell. If you do know a lot about After Effects, I'm going to use a tracking mat right now. If you don't know a lot about After Effects, maybe this will go over your head. But I could use the alpha, even though this visual doesn't look good, the color information doesn't look good, I could still use the alpha channel of it to use to mask out this layer that does look good. That makes sense. So let me find the name. They're all named the same thing right now, which is not good. You should name these relevant to what they are. So that's that. That's the foreground. Okay, that's the foreground. So I could use this layer, put this on top, and make a tracking mat. Now it looks good. So I'm using the matte, I'm using the alpha matte of the one that has the bad color to cut out the one that looks good. It's kind of a tedious process to do it like that. All a tracking mat is using the alpha or the brightness of one layer to mask out something else. So for instance, I could import, actually I think I have the green screen footage of here of the lady. I could use this layer and I could tell it to use the alpha to mask out that. So it's using the alpha of the rock to matte out anything that I put behind it. It's a little more advanced After Effects stuff. But maybe for those of you that know a little bit more about After Effects, that's interesting. All right, so multi-layer EXRs, the extractor effect, pretty straightforward, but the color is a bummer. So my suggestion would be to not do multi-layer EXRs, at least until we solve that bug. So let's try this again. Go back to the movie render queue, go back to EXRs, change multi-layer, uncheck the button. Now we're going to render out the 850 so files. I want to put these in a different folder. So let's just call this layers, I guess. Alternatively, in your renders, when you go to render, you could pick a different folder and just render out one actor layer at a time. If you wanted to render 3 separate times, then you could render directly into your foreground folder, directly into your background folder, or you can go into Explorer and drag the files into separate folders later if you wanted to, if you like to be organized that way. I usually just dump them all into one folder because the name is written into the file, as you'll see in a second here. So let's render these out again. So what's the advantage of doing any of this? Good question. This is very second class. You already put video footage in Unreal World. You click the render button, bam. You thought you were good to go, right? You thought, that looks great. That looked okay. It didn't look great. The advantage of doing this process where camera tracked or not, this is not for just if you're doing the camera tracking. This is for any sort of rendering out of Unreal. You should use this sort of process for maximum control with EXR files. It has nothing to do with camera tracking. It's just our example footage in this case has the camera moving. Even if it's the steering wheel footage or whatever, the camera's not moving. It doesn't matter, it's the same thing. The advantage of a system like this is that if we do it all in Unreal, once I bring that texture in of her keyed out, I don't have a lot of color controls over that video footage anymore. I'm kind of stuck with it, right? And Unreal already has a tendency to not make video textures look that great. There are ways to get them to look a lot better, but they use much more advanced methods than we'll talk about in this class, something called composure. But the point is that it doesn't look great. The true way to composite is to circle back and use a compositing program like After Effects. So the video footage that we put into Unreal, like in this case, where we did the Miley Cyrus riding the cat or the girl in the garden, all of that is just for pre-visualization purposes, for you to build your world around. You're never actually going to render out the video footage from Unreal and use it. It's just for reference. Then you go back to After Effects and you drag your original green screen footage in, or not green screen footage, and you put it in there. You're not taking the footage that's been rendered out from Unreal of green screen and using that, because it's going to look like shit. You're using the original files. And especially if you're shooting on a camera like this, that's shooting like Blackmagic RAW, then you have all of that power to control those files after you've built your world and brought them back in. Remember we talked about keying in green screen? How you shouldn't try to, it's really difficult to get a good key against solid colors, right? Solid white, solid black, solid red. In reality, you're never going to put those people on those backgrounds unless you're making like Apple commercials from 2010 or iPod commercials from earlier than that. They're never going to be on solid color background. In this world, she's in like weird rocky worlds. So I want to key her out in a way that makes her look like she belongs in that world. So when we keyed out and we just brought into Unreal, we were just kind of making it look good on black, right? We were paying no attention to the world that we were putting it in. Now, after all this stuff is rendered out and we go back to After Effects, we have the backgrounds there rendered out already. Now we can key her out from the beginning again and make it look good. Put a little glow on her hair because, the rocks are light colored and they're bouncing light. We can do all these sorts of things that maybe we didn't think of when we shot the footage. Because ideally, when you're shooting the footage in studio or outside, you're trying to match the lighting. It helps to have an idea of the scene that you're going to build in Unreal when you go and shoot it on green screen, right? So like you can put lights in the appropriate positions. You can think about bounced light. If You know, if it's a moody scene with a strong, colorful light, you better shoot them on set with a strong, colorful light, or it's not going to look like a ghost together, right? There are ways that you can fake that, but it's incredibly difficult. That being said, that there are the sentence, there are ways that you can fake that, but it's incredibly difficult. Somebody bring that back up to me in a couple minutes because I'll show you this very cool tool that allows you to do that quite easily. But that's why we're doing all of this compositing after the fact for maximum control to get the best possible looking image we can. Do you get 80% of the way there just hitting the render button in Unreal and calling it a day? Yeah, you get 80% of the way there. Maybe 85% of the way there. But that's for amateurs. And when you start to do more complex stuff, you will run into like a wall at a certain point where it looks like it was rendered in Unreal. But yeah, it depends on the job, it depends on time, depends on your skill level, you know, all things considered. But I'm just showing you the advanced pipeline now. All right, let's start a new project. Start from 0 here. So I rendered out a lot of files now from Unreal. We didn't render them out as multi-layer anymore. We rendered them out as single layer. So it's going to render out the foreground separately. It's going to render out the background separately. It's going to render out that default layer because I think I still checked the box. If you look at these files, you see like this one, the file name is, at the end, it is appended with final image background. So that's the background image sequence. There's files in here, if I scroll, that say, well, that one doesn't say anything on it, so I assume that it's the default layer. If I scroll down here, yeah, here's the foreground. It says foreground, or whatever you called your layer. The name that it says here is what you called your layer in Unreal. So I'm going to pick foreground. When you import image sequences, it doesn't really matter which frame you pick. The software should recognize all of them, assuming they're named sequentially. Click import. So I'm not using an extractor here anymore because there's nothing to extract. It's just one layer. One layer of just these rocks. Notice the colors look good now. We don't have that bug like what we did with the multi-layer EXR files. This is still an EXR. It's just not a multi-layer EXR. All right, so let's import our background too. Background. I really didn't need to render out the default layer. But you know what? What's another 16.3 megabytes a frame times 214 frames? EXRs fill up your hard drive pretty fast. So here's the background rendered out by itself. You know what? I'll import the default layer too, just to have it. In this case, it has the green screen. I might turn off the green screen when I render this out just to have everything without the green screen, but that's fine. So I'll start building a composition from this now. Easiest way to create a composition After Effects, just right-click the footage, new comp from selection. And I'm going to click on this layer. Oops. Click on this layer to rename it. Right-click it to rename it. Call this default. I'll drag in this one, which is the background. Drag in this one, which is the foreground. I'll just rename these very quick. FG, BG, and now I have them all separated out. So here's the foreground rocks. There's the background rocks. You can also use this method to create some sort of a 2.5D effect too. Like if If you didn't actually move the camera on set, you could create depth and parallax with 2D layers. In our case here, we have the holes that we have to deal with, so you might have to rethink how you render this out. Maybe stencil layers wouldn't be the best in this case, but you could get like the sliding effect to the parallax. Whereas if you move the camera in, you could get some of that as well. I guess a vertical parallax you could get. If you're more familiar with After Effects and understand what that is. Now I could get my original green screen footage, which is somewhere here. There it is. Bring that in, put it behind, do a really quick key on her. This footage is very compressed and not very conducive to keying. It has a lot of spill. Oops, oh, I put the effect on the wrong layer. Key up the background, just like we've done before. It's a little crunchy, but in the interest of time, not keying her out too fast right now. But that's kind of cool. You have like an XR look here, kind of. She's keyed out. You have the foreground layer, and then you have her keyed out of the background, and then you have the background layer, and then you have the original green screen behind that. No shadow or anything. Lighting sucks on her, but the point is showing you the different layers rendered out. Also, she doesn't stick to the floor very well. So this process, whether you're moving the camera or not, is a process that you should use. Questions about that? And then you make it all look good in After Effects, and you render it out from After Effects. Post it on YouTube, share the link with your mom. Job well done. So I put Lady in Rockland, Mom. Check this out. 100K to do this. Questions? Y'all never have any questions. On her? We've talked about this before. Advanced Spill Suppressor works pretty good in After Effects. I like to change it to Ultra. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Also, let me turn off the default layer. There's some other things going on here too, like the lights in the scene. Also, when the camera wraps around, there's this post. Kind of looks, you could rebuild a room and then incorporate the live action footage of this post into the world, I'm using rocks that don't really make sense for like the actual pillar from the video footage, but you could. But to get rid of this stuff, I guess we didn't really talk about this either. If you don't just have the green screen in the back, you're going to have some stuff to deal with, like the lights up top. Now, let me turn off some of these other things. So you see some of this other garbage in the shot. To get rid of this stuff, we can create what's called a garbage mat. It's basically a mask, a pen tool mask around her that says, keep this, everything else, get rid of. So just a quick and dirty way to do this. Select the footage that you want to matte or to mask. When I say matte, mats are masks. It's just with video footage, they're called mats. Also, my name is Matt, so it's kind of weirds me out. And I keep looking at Matt over there too. It's freaking him out too. So click on your layer. Another thing about After Effects, for those of you that aren't super familiar, Be careful if you double click on things because you will end up in another panel up top called layer or even footage. When you're in the layer, you're just looking at what that layer is. You want to be clicked on composition, and this is just a tab that you click on. Click on the composition tab to open up the window to see everything. Here, let me turn on the background just so you can understand a little bit more. So in the composition tab up top here, composition is showing me everything down here, which is the foreground, the green screen, the background. If I double click on my green screen footage here, it jumps to layer, and now I don't see the rocks anymore. Even though the rocks are down here, it's because I'm not looking at the composition, I'm looking at the layer. So this is a layer view, not a composition view. If you ever do that and you're in a panic because you don't see what you're supposed to see, it's probably because you're not on the composition tab. Okay, anyways, so let's make the matte. So single click on the layer that you want to matte out, and there's a couple different ways to do this, but I'm going to use the pen tool up top. And this is rotoscoping here. So I'm just going to drop points around her, and this one should be relatively easy. Let me turn off those other layers real quick. Let me change the color of the mask so you can see it a little bit better. See that now? So this is a mask that's currently an additive mask. So you can see right here and right here. You can also inverse that and do subtractive masks. We can also animate masks. I don't know if we need to do that. Let's scrub our footage and see. Oh, yep, see? Her foot gets occluded here by the map. So I have two solutions. One, make the mask bigger. So her foot falls within it, right? In this case, that's going to work. Some cases, you'll want to actually animate the mask with keyframes. But that's more work, and that's unnecessary for this. So now her entire body falls within, oh, actually, a little bit too much up top. You might have to animate the mask here. We'll see. Let's play it and see. She's not keyed out that great. Good enough for now. So that's matted out now. Now I don't have that garbage in the frame. I would also want to render out an Unreal background to put behind in the checkerboard pixels right now. Because right now it's just, we could put anything back there. Right? Or some other video footage if you wanted to. We could put her behind herself, but moved over to the side and scaled up. So she could be like horrifying to herself. Here, send this to your mom. Right? There you go. So spend time actually doing a good key on it. Or if it's not on green screen, then you're going to have to rotoscope it out a little bit more intensely. Rotoscoping is something we're going to look at after we take a break. Questions? Green screen spill, that was an easy one. Thanks for the low-hanging fruit. Nobody else? All right. There was that thing that you were supposed to remind me of, but nobody did. I know you all hate AI in this class, but there's this really cool AI tool that I discovered like a year ago called Switchlight. And what this allows you to do essentially is relight a scene or a person. So say I could shoot, well, I guess we did. Say we shot this footage of this lady on green screen. The lighting is pretty flat. It's all around lighting. I could take that footage and I could relight it, which is not a trivial thing. This is practically impossible before software like this. I could relight the scene to any sort of lighting that I want. And then I could re-render out her footage relit to whatever I wanted my world to match the lighting in my world. So check it out. It's pretty legit. It's probably the coolest AI tool that I've ever seen before. And check this out. This is going to blow your minds. Or I always think it's going to blow students' mind, and nobody says anything, and then I feel kind of lame about it. Oh, I'm going to use one of their examples. So let's just pick this lady here. Select an HDRI footage. Sure, let's put her outside at night. Look at this. All around lit, shadow in the shade against the wall here. Now we're going to put her in the scene and match the lighting to it. Makes you look a little plasticky, but you know, they're working on it. I think this is fucking insane, personally. I've used it before. It works really great. So, you know, check that tool out. Maybe we don't need to do fancy lighting on set. We'll just shoot with all super boring lighting and then just use software to do this. Why do we even have a photo shoot at all? Right? But I thought this was cool to do. You can also like you could feed in your Unreal scene. You could record out your Unreal scene as a 360 capture, an HDRI, which is what this is, and then you could light your person. It's pretty cool. Change things like the brightness, move it around, change where the lighting position is, and also for the more nerdy people of us, we can render out different channels. So even more cool, check this out. I've gotten this to work with so-so results. This is a normal map of an extracted normal map of this person's portrait. Normal maps give you the faux 3D of otherwise a flat surface. Right? This wall, imagine this was a brick wall in a video game. Usually it's perfectly smooth because it would take a lot of computational power to render out all the nooks and crannies of an actual brick wall. I could take this normal map and her original picture into Unreal, make a material from it, and then use the lights in Unreal to light her in Unreal in real time without having to use this web software. Maybe that doesn't make sense to you, but basically it's like she's a 3D scan in Unreal, and then I can light her there. Pretty cool stuff. Any other questions? Let's take a break. Let's come back at 4. We're not going to really look at much new stuff. I think we'll just leave some time for questions about the assignment, and maybe I won't show the object IDs because they're pretty much the same thing, and you're not going to use them anyways. You're going to use the stencil layers. So I'll show another example of this, and then we'll leave some time for questions about your assignment. All right, come back at 4. Yo. Oh, we should look at rotoscoping. That's a good idea. We'll do a little demo in class. I'm recording. Thank you. What was I saying? So this is the scene. It all looks good. Uh, I have these pumpkins that I want to put behind her too. I have some cool shadows going on and everything. Unfortunately, I didn't have every. I was trying to render this out during the break, but I missed some pieces because I called something. I don't want to render it again, so it's not going to look as good as it does here in the final composite. But that's just because I didn't render everything out. So my bad. But the what I really want to show you is like putting this behind her, right? So as the visualization in Unreal, I kind of just have to imagine that dirt patch and that pumpkin behind her right now because we haven't talked about how to, do a multi-layer composite in Unreal. It is possible, but you have to get into composure and it's very tedious. So we're just not going to get into that. So what I need to do is what we talked about before. We're going to render out that dirt patch in the middle and the pumpkin as a separate layer. It's called background pumpkins. And then we're going to rotoscope her out and put that behind her. And then try to do some color matching and stuff. So I've rendered out these pieces already from Unreal. Unfortunately, I'm missing a lot of stuff. And I don't have time to get it back. So you just have to live with it. That being said, let me reload this. There we go. I do have the background pumpkin rendered out, which is kind of the whole point of this. So right now, here's my layers. Really, the only is this. That's the video footage. So that's the video footage layer. This is that. For some reason, I put one little pumpkin on one layer. I don't know. Maybe we want to change it to be purple or something. We could do that. The gates are on a separate layer. That's kind of useful and cool. And then the background part. So the cool thing about the gates on a separate layer is that since I didn't blur them in Unreal, I could do like a fake blur on them, fake Gaussian blur in post here, kind of get like some depth of field effect. And you probably want to keyframe it so when you get closer to them, they get more blurry, and as you pull back, they get less blurry. You really want to go into the nuance on this, but for this demo, this is what we have to work with. So I want to put this pumpkin behind her. So she's not shot on green screen. I am recording. That has been made clear. I want to put this pumpkin and this dirt mound behind her. So what we have to do is rotoscoping. So a lot of different techniques that you could look at for rotoscoping. We're just going to use the built-in rotobrush in After Effects, which is painful, but it's like a good pain. It works okay, but not perfect, but it's easy to use. We're not going to go through frame by frame rotoscoping or anything like that in this class. But in the future, you could go down that route should you need to for something. So what we need to do is we need to get a copy of her on top of this pumpkin. So for example, I'm going to duplicate the footage of her and put it on top of the layer stack. What's going to happen? Obviously, she's going to cover up the pumpkin, right? You know how we made that mask on the green screen of that woman? If I just masked out this little piece of her, obviously that part is now on top of the pumpkin because this part is just in the foreground. That would be great if she was skinny rectangle shaped, but she's not, and she has hair, so that's not going to work. If you were just putting something down by her legs, it could be decently, or not decently, but more easy because her pants are kind of hard edged, and you could pen tool out that. Of course, you'd have to do it over the duration of the video clip, which is what makes all this difficult. I used to just teach a rotoscoping class, and it'd be like the second class of the semester. We'd use the pen tool, and everybody would do a really intricate pen tool path around somebody's like one leg, and they'd be like, "Oh yeah, you did a good job, great job. It's cut out, it looks clean." They'd be like, "Cool, now move forward one frame," and it's all gone. and we have to move the keyframe, move the little points for the entire duration of the video. Um, she's not square shaped or rectangle shaped, so we can't use that method. Can't just put a rectangle on top of her. The tool that is easiest to use, and I'm just going to delete the mask here. The tool that's easiest to use in After Effects is the roto brush. Almost always, all of these rotoscoping tools are used in combination with each other. So what works for part of her body might not work good for another part. Maybe, I don't know, she has green plants behind her. Maybe we could try to key them out. They're kind of greenish. It's very distinct from the rest of the scene. She does have green flowers on her clothes, but who knows? There are all of these techniques that we can try. There is no written push button solution where you go, you do this, you do this, you do this, and you get a perfect rotoscope. That's just, it changes for every single image, perhaps for every single frame, the techniques that you use. I'm going to show you a couple of techniques in our limited time today. So this is a fairly difficult shot. You know, it would be easier if she was wearing like solid red, not greenish in her clothes. Also, her hair kind of blends into the green of the plants a little bit. But we're going to see what happens and see how it goes. Does anybody ever watch the YouTube channel Corridor Crew, the VFX guys? They did a really fun rotoscoping challenge a couple years ago, maybe more than a couple years ago. No, that's not the, we're not going to watch it now, but maybe I'll try to post it. And they had like 5 different dudes use 5 different techniques for rotoscoping, and it was a race to see who got done first. One person used Rotobrush 1 in After Effects. One person used the new beta version of Rotobrush 2. Another person hand cut them out each frame in Photoshop. Somebody else used an AI tool. There was a lot of, somebody used a like pen tool, and they see who was fastest and who was the best quality. It was kind of cool to see. But the point is that different techniques for different scenes and different parts of your scene. Anyways, in our limited time, let's just use the Rotobrush and cross our fingers. So the Rotobrush is up top here. It's this little brush and the little stick figure guy here. Click that, and you need to double click your footage to actually go into layer mode here. Remember before break I told you be careful about that, because we are editing the layer. We're using the Rotobrush on the layer. After you do that, you will see that you have, well, not when I zoom in, but I don't know if you can see the little cursor is a little brush icon. Perhaps you've used like the, there's like a dumbed down version of the Rotobrush in modern Photoshops. Perhaps you've used it in like selective masking mode in Photoshop or in After Effects. Let's walk through this then. So I'm also going to get the brushes menu here that allows me to change the size of my brush. Fortunately, I don't have a mouse right now, so I don't have a scroll wheel to change my brush size. So I'm going to go to my beginning of my footage. And with the Rotobrush, green painting means that you want to add that to the selection. And if you hold down Alt or Option, it turns red. And that means you paint away. So you're removing. If you think of a mask like black and white, positive, negative, green is painting white, which is you want to keep, and red is removing it, painting black. So I'm just going to freeze my computer. That's what I'm going to do. All right, to the best of my ability, I'm going to generally paint on her body. And you see this pink line that comes up that is basically the cutout edge of her. And this is very trial and error. The software tries to do a good job. You probably want to change your brush size to get into the nooks and crannies of things. You know, this would be a great tool for AI to just like remove person from background perfectly. There's tools that come close to that, but still usually some manual stuff has to be done. So what needs to be rotoscoped out too? That's a great question. I'm glad you asked. I'm just going around her right now and painting out the ground. See, my brush originally got the ground. I didn't paint the ground, but After Effects was like, oh, you totally want the ground. Here's the ground. I'm going to lower my brush size, try to go between the legs here. It's like on and off, on and off. Okay, I think that's a good start. This is not going to be the best for this demo, but this is a good start. Right there. And also, as soon as I hit play, it's all going to go to hell anyway. So what just happened? Well, she got matted out with a very crispy looking mat. But just because it looks crispy here doesn't mean that it won't work necessarily. So that's what's happened. Okay? And if I advance a frame or couple frames, see that it starts to stick to her. She hasn't moved much. She's turning her head now. But we lost a little bit of hair there. Hair is a completely other thing. We'll try to do that using another iteration of the tool. But the point is that I didn't have to draw a pen tool around her every frame. This did a mediocre job, but a good starting point. So what does this mean with our background pumpkin? Well, if I turn it on, oops, I still have that mask on there. It is. What exactly is masked out? Oh no, don't tell me that that is actually rendered into the pumpkin. It's the gate. See the gate blocking the pumpkin? God damn it. Well, ignore the big hole from the gate. Why don't I turn the gate on, actually? That's a good idea. That would make this look better. There we go. Now the pumpkin is behind her. At least for one frame. Good job, team. We did one frame out of 243. We did a mediocre job with one frame out of 243. And if I turn off the roto brush, then doesn't work. So we have to go through and process for the roto brush for the entire thing. Actually, you know what? Yeah, that's fine. So if I go back to that layer for her, and I'm just going to hit the space bar and let this rip because we don't have time to really refine it. Properly, you would want to go through here and be like, oh, it looks really bad there. I'm going to paint that section on, paint that section off. Go a couple more frames, maybe use the page down and page up keys rather than just letting it rip with the space bar. That actually looks not bad on the legs. Remember I told you that the pants were going to be the easier part anyways. But if she started to move really fast, then we would start to have more problems. But so far, that's not too bad. But the only parts that matter, I don't even need to worry about most of her hair because most of her hair never crosses over the pumpkin, right? The only parts I really care about is this part of the body right here and this part of the body on her backside. Oops. I just lost everything. Did I turn that effect off? I don't even need to worry about her feet because the dirt is never going to, this 3D graphic behind her is never going to go down there. So you only really need to roto out that chunk of her body in the middle there. If I move the graphic, then yeah, it would be a problem. So I'm just going to let this process and we'll see what we end up with. Rotobrush 2 in After Effects, just a pretty alright job, to be honest. Has some secret AI sauce in there that detects people. You can see the space between her arm becomes problematic. So remember I said you might want to build up with multiple tools. Maybe you start with the roto brush because it's quick and easy, even if it is a little dirty. And then for those problem areas like between her arm, those flickers, maybe you go in manually with the pen tool, or maybe you do another roto brush in those areas, or you go back and try to make your one-shot roto brush work too. There was, remember that video we watched a couple weeks ago with the bird cages and the dinosaurs in the Jurassic Park? It was that demo reel from this roto brush artist. And it was like they cut out all the intricate pieces of like the eagle's wings. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? There's like the bird cages in the market that went by. Yeah, yeah, some people, not for everybody else. Were you sleeping? Uh, anyways, I don't have that video available right now. But if you remember, different pieces of the different elements that were rotobrushed out were different colors because the rotobrush artist was illustrating that they didn't just try to do this all in one go. They did it in sections and pieces of the subject. So that's another thing to think about too is what works for one part of the body might not work for another. Different strategies for different parts at different times in the video. So what may seem like a simple thing where I just kind of squiggle around her body and hit spacebar can become much more tedious. But you know, this gets us 75% of the way there, you know? And if you squint, you would never even notice that we need to do more. And here's the mat on her. Pretty neat. And now if I go back to the comp, this is cut out then. And you know that flicker on her hair is not a problem. I think maybe the part between her arms might be a problem, but let's see. Let's see what it looks like in the final comp. Because again, if you can't tell, then nobody's going to notice, right? Don't do more work than you have to. Sometimes you'll spend like 95% of the work you spend on a project will just be in like that last 5% of quality, you know? Is it worth it to get that far? I don't know. You have to make that call. Let's see. It's a little crunchy on the edge, but I think it's a good starting point. So that's one method that you can use to put objects behind somebody. Rotoscoping with the roto brush. What else do we have here? We have, oh, this little pumpkin. That's a good question. I kind of just like glossed over that and was like, good enough, right? Now you're gonna hold my feet to the fire. And you're like, no, make it look good. Cool, bro. You know what? I'm gonna do it. Let's do it. I had moved on, and I was gonna turn this pumpkin purple, which you know is much simpler to do. Good question. So yes, you could go back to the original roto brush and try to edit that. Let's do that, and let's take a look. I'm gonna turn off the pixels there. Let's find out where it becomes a problem. Right there. So could you paint this out? You could, but Rotobrush does a really terrible job at going from no hole to a tiny bit to big and then back. It doesn't scale well, you know. It does great with these larger shapes like the rest of her body that never gets closed down or opened, but it doesn't do good with those things. So my professional opinion would be to manually do it with a pen tool instead of the rotobrush because the rotobrush it's a great tool, but it's not really made for that. You know what I mean? Does that mean that you're gonna have to go frame by frame with the pen tool and probably hate yourself? Yeah, you're gonna have to do that. So let's do exactly that. Where's the part? Luckily, I didn't render out enough footage that Oh, I did, but my composition ends right there. The footage goes on, but my composition stops. So we're just going to stop right at the end there. Oh, it actually turns out, see, once it gets big enough, the roto brush is like, oh yeah, that's an arm. So what I'll do is I go back to the composition and what I'll probably turn off the background pumpkin and the background footage. So I'll just see her, maybe on black too. And I'll turn off the front gates too. So I can just work with that. I just turned off all those other layers. And then just like we did when we did the garbage mat around the green screen lady, this is quick and dirty without a mouse too, so don't judge me. Just go around and quickly this out. Just like wrinkles in the shirt, but I'm just assuming that it's a smooth cut in the interest of time. I should have frozen my roto brush because it's propagating all these changes to the roto brush. Maybe I should go and do that first. When you're happy with how the roto brush is, whether you're going to do more to it or not, you should go back and click this freeze button, which I'll show you in a second. So let's turn this mask off. Go back to the roto brush, and you have to click on the effect. Actually, it might have ruined it since I put the mask on. Where's the freeze button, y'all? There's supposed to be a button here that says freeze. Maybe because it hasn't all processed yet. I knew you were trying to trip me up. Propagation. That's fine. Quality standard. You can also increase, there's a lot of effect settings with the roto brush that you can play around with. Feathering and the chatter, like if you have a lot of jitter on the edge, you can mess around with that. Although those settings really increase the time. Roto brush is a really intense tool too. Damn, she's just not cut out anymore. What happened to her? Well, we'll do it over again. I'm not sure what happened. All right, let's just say this is good enough in the interest of time. Yeah, there's the freeze button in the bottom right. Still have the arm problem, but now it's on both arms. Great. Step one, make sure your roto brush doesn't suck. Don't delete it like I did. Man, this is even worse now. That's all right. It's just because I am not taking the time right now because we don't have much time left. So freeze button. Freeze button, when you're happy with your roto brush, personally, I'm not happy. Just flagging that for the record. I don't think this is good. Click the freeze button, and that basically locks your roto brush. Because anytime you go and do something else to the layer, it's going to propagate the roto brush every single time. And if you have like 4K footage and you have a lot more roto going on, it's going to take a long time to process. And it's going to really suck to deal with. So when you're happy with it, freeze it, because then we can go on to the other techniques, like the using the pen tool. So here it's going to play at normal speed because it's basically saved that mat out. I'm going to go to that part with the arm right here. I'm just going to the middle of the footage when she has her arms open a little bit, and then I'm going to work backwards and forwards from there. So I said, the shirt has a little bit of nuance in it as far as like wrinkles and stuff goes that you would probably want to mask out a little bit better with the pen tool. So good enough for now. See how it didn't do that propagation because I clicked freeze on the roto brush. So what kind of mask is this? This is a subtractive mask. So I got to change that add to a subtract to put a hole in it. Where's my hole? Oh, really? Maybe I need to put the mask on a composition. I need to pre-compose it. That's weird. Here we go. So I just masked a pre-comp there. So that looks acceptable for this frame, but what about this frame? You know, the mask is moved because it's not animated. So now I can go and animate the mask. If you click on the drop-down menus on that, you see mask path. See a little stopwatch next to that. That will activate the keyframes and lay down a keyframe at this moment of time right there. So now I can go back a couple frames, grab the mask, and sometimes I like to turn it off and just have the outline. Oops. Very tedious, right? I've only done one frame. You know how we did the Jedi thing? I think I told you I used to bring in that cloak and have people just hold like a broomstick and swing it around, and then they would mask out the rectangle shape of the stick every single frame with the pen tool, and then we would make it glowy. It's fun. So the cool thing about keyframes in After Effects when you're masking is that you might not necessarily have to key every single frame. I've done 2 keys for 3 frames here. So the middle frame is just interpolating that movement. Maybe it's okay, maybe it's not. Maybe you have to do more work. We'll see. Maybe I'll do 2 more frames. Oops. How's that look? I skipped another frame. No, see, that's not good enough. I need to adjust it here. But also work really zoomed in. This footage isn't, oh, I'm also an idiot. I'm working at half resolution. You should work at full resolution. That looks a lot better. See, it's not getting the bumps of her shirt. So I'll want to move this out a little bit. I would probably want to be a little bit more nuanced with my points and add a couple more points. But you can see that the mask is now animating to her movement. Thank God for the roto brush, we don't have to do this for entire body, right? So that's what you'd have to do. Or in Photoshop, every frame, make another layer and paint black or white on top of her. All right, let's turn that mask back on, subtract. And now she has a very smooth body arm because the mask doesn't have a lot of nuance to it. But we've solved that problem. So combining techniques. I mean, it's easy stuff. It's just it sucks to do because it's very tedious. Any other questions? Because then I really want to color my pumpkin now. Put the gates back on. So for some reason, I had rendered this pumpkin out as a separate layer as well by itself. So I'm just going to drop a little hue and saturation on it. Because you know what? While I was in Unreal, I decided I like orange pumpkins, but today I decided I like purple pumpkins for some reason. So because it's matted out, we can change the pumpkin. Or we can keep it orange and just, adjust the saturation a little bit or darken it. These are EXR files, so we can push and pull with the colors a lot more than we could with like a PNG sequence or something. Another thing that I would want to do that I haven't done yet is try to color grade my video footage. Not only her, but the backgrounds too. Let's try to grade the background a little bit. Saturate this a little bit. Let's a little bit. That little dirt patch should be a little bit nuanced in the mesh. And if I was to try to do this really good, I would almost want to recreate all those little bunches of dirt to try to simulate in 3D how the ground actually looks in the video footage. Because then you would get something that looks much more realistic. Another thing I'd want to do is start to put fake grass on top of these dirt patches so it doesn't look so obviously digital. I tried to do a little bit of that in the actual Unreal render. Unfortunately, it just didn't render out. See, even though it's a different color right now, putting that Unreal grass in front of the dirt and the real video grass starts to help to merge those together. I would want to mess with the material to try to merge those colors together. Same for the dirt. I would want to try to merge those colors with the video footage to help blend them. And then I would also want to try to do those things in post-production too. The most important things that you can do when talking about compositing video footage is, one, on shoot day, if you're shooting on green screen, you need to recreate the lighting of the world that you're going to put them in. So even if you don't have your world finished, at least know like there's going to be a light over here. She's going to be extremely backlit by the sun. And then there's going to be, I don't know, a gelled red light shining on her face. All right, then you need to recreate that light on set with lights in real life. The opposite is true in this case for this scene, because instead of me matching the video footage to the Unreal scene, in this case, I'm trying to match the Unreal light to the real world scene, because the video footage of the real world is the predominant background of this. I didn't really do that because the sun in this case is very harsh to cast that shadow on the ground. But I would want to try to, well, not make it not visible, but try to eliminate the shadow, try to take down it makes really flat, boring lighting, but just try to match the lighting as best as possible. So the sun is pointing. Shadows are kind of non-existent. They're just straight down. And then actually eliminate shadows if possible too, using sky atmosphere. And then try to grade it so it's more flat looking too to match the footage. All of these sorts of things can come together to help to merge your worlds. And that's kind of what I want you to try to do for next week. Don't freak out about it. These are all test projects. You might show your mom, but it's nothing award winning. The expectation is not that it's going to be award winning. If it's amazing, then that's awesome. And you probably have some background in this already, or you're just really good. But don't stress out too much about it. The point is more just going through the process and going through the journey than having it look perfect. So we can always get better technically. I just want you to understand the overarching process more than anything. All right. If you have any questions, happy to talk about them. Otherwise, we'll see you next week. First half of class, it's a little TBD, but the first half of class, we're going to look at, I don't know about everybody's stuff, but maybe some volunteers or some of the better looking stuff. We'll post all of it, but we have a limited time. And then we'll see how much we can do on the wall. The goal next week is to show you moving the camera on the wall and then having the background in Unreal shift on the wall so that it looks like you're actually there. But some of that is out of our hands, depending on how the wall pipeline is currently working. Okay? So we'll see what happens. But next week's the beginning of a shift in direction. All right, see ya.